But if Congress will not impeach, will it commit to reissuing all of the subpoenas and contempt citations in the next Congress that have been mocked and ignored in this Congress? Or has that all been a mutual pretense between branches of our government? The appeals courts are going to dump the responsibility to enforce these subpoenas back where it always belonged, on the Congress. Since the day this country began, Congress, either House and any committee thereof, has had the power of inherent contempt, the power to send the Capitol Police to arrest and detain people for contempt of Congress. It has been almost 75 years since Congress last used this power. It can be used today for Karl Rove, for Harriet Miers, for any of them. Or we can forget congressional oversight. It's over with. There is no more subpoena power. Tomorrow, if you have 5 minutes, go to afterdowningstreet.org or simply Google New Hampshire State Legislature and call a few members of the New Hampshire State Legislature, because they are voting tomorrow, as other state legislatures have, on whether to petition the United States Congress to impeach Bush and Cheney. If it passes, then the Secretary of State of New Hampshire is required to so petition. The other thing you can do is to make out a check to Cindy Sheehan for Congress and mail it to Cindy Sheehan for Congress in San Francisco and Xerox it first. Make a photocopy first. Send that to Nancy Pelosi and to the San Francisco Examiner and Chronicle, because Nancy Pelosi has to feel some pressure, and that is the only thing she cares about. There's also a good website I recommend called convictbushcheney.org. And if you go there, one of the proposals you'll find will be that of Vincent Bugliosi, who's a former prosecutor with a now best-selling book called The Prosecution of George W. Bush for Murder. And we are lining up prosecutors at the state and county levels, and Gold Star families, and veterans of this war, who will prosecute this president for murder and for attempted murder. I don't have time to go into the legal argument. We're going to do questions and answers after Ann Wright speaks, but there is a strong case that can be made, and there is a strong candidate for Attorney General of Vermont named Charlotte Dennett, who is campaigning that if elected, she will immediately appoint Vince Bugliosi special prosecutor, and they will prosecute George Bush for murder. So if you're not broke after helping out Cindy Sheehan, look up Charlotte Dennett for Attorney General of Vermont. You will also find at convictbushcheney.org documentation of all the lawyers. Yes, I'm sorry, there are also bad lawyers in this world. All the lawyers and advisors who made torture happen, who made wars of aggression happen, who threw out habeas corpus. And you will find a kit telling you how to conduct a citizen's arrest. And a few months ago, when some young people were put on trial in Iowa for having conducted a citizen's arrest of Karl Rove, complete with handcuffs, the judge was told what they were there for, and his first and only comment was, well, it's about time. So it is about time for all of these guys, and there's a long list of them there, and many of them come through Virginia. You'll find an endless number of other useful links there that I don't have time to go through, but there are endless ways in which we can pursue prosecution internationally, abroad, federally, and locally. But it starts in January or February, and we are going to have to be straight with ourselves and everyone we reach by that point. We're going to have to come to terms with what happened in this election, because it is very likely to be stolen. And if the guy we don't want, we least want in the White House is there, or life expectancy being what it is, woman, is there, it's not the end of the world. They cannot stop us from retaking our proper place as the sovereigns of this nation, as the people who put this nation on the earth, if we don't want them to. They simply can't. And nobody else, certainly not the other leading contender for the White House, is going to do it for us. It is going to be up to us. But if this thing is stolen, which appears clearly to be already underway in terms of illegally removing voters from the rolls and suppressing voter turnout and permitting unverifiable elections on electronic machines, including in this state, we're going to have to recognize this quickly and motivate everyone we know to focus on it, right? Because we've got a major problem in that the people who pay attention to election fraud and election suppression are not fundamentally the most enthusiastic supporters of Obama for president. They're two different groups of people, and they are going to have to work together very, very soon. This is like a war of aggression as the supreme international crime that includes all other crimes. Election fraud is the supreme domestic crime, including within itself the accumulated evil of the whole, all the other crimes that follow. You can go to standingforvoters.org, standingforvoters.org, and get cards that can be given to candidates, local level candidates, federal candidates, demanding that they take a position, committing not to accept any questionable election results as winner or loser. I don't want to use too much time. I want to say a few more things, but I want to tell you about retired colonel in the U.S. Army, Ann Wright. I met her in Crawford, Texas in August 2005 in something like 160-degree heat in the shade, in the most awful place I could imagine as a billionaire choosing to build my pretend ranch for my cowboy scenes. And I wrote at that time the following words on afterdowningstreet.org. Last Saturday there were 1,000 people, and last Sunday about 800. Everyone expects a larger crowd this weekend, and the pro-war folks claim they'll have a big crowd too. We want big crowds, Ann said. It will be miserable but wonderful. Everyone ought to endure a little misery, just like our troops are doing in Iraq. Physically you'll be miserable, but emotionally you'll be at the highest point, as Ann clearly is herself. She's amazed by the efforts people have made to come. 4 women from Monterey, California came after their community raised the money to send them. Another told a taxi driver she was coming here, and he got out of the cab and gave her a kiss. The one guy who hasn't been around is Bush, who flew off to Utah and Idaho. He can't get in or out of his ranch by land when he comes back because both entrances have become protest camps. He can travel by helicopter. Ann said there was also a helicopter landing area at Camp Casey 2 in case Bush wanted to use it, and that he's invited to our barbecue on Saturday. We're good neighbors, she said. He hasn't even sent us a cup of lemonade, and we've been waiting. A new small tent was set up today next to the enormous one at Camp Casey 2. It will serve as a base for organizations that have joined this effort but are not the central focus of it. The focus, of course, is on veterans and military families who want answers from Bush about why this war was fought. Ann Wright, a career diplomat, said, "Every diplomatic skill I have ever had has come into use in the work of including disparate groups and a range of issues without diluting the powerful focus of Cindy's message. But it's been wonderful," she said. "Everyone is here because they support this woman's action and want this war to end." Ann and I had to stop chatting when the ice truck arrived. Now, it was absolutely the most miserable and wonderful thing. And we were talking with some folks last night who said, yeah, but we thought it was going to work. It did work. It did work. It built a bigger, more motivated, more mobilized, more informed peace and justice movement, which is something that never wins victories quickly. Has to fail many, many times and continue to grow regardless. And Ann joined this movement the day we invaded Iraq, when she did something that thousands upon thousands of people have an absolute moral duty to do right this minute, and that is resign from the United States government. She had spent decades in the U.S. State Department and in the military. There was a quote that Ann used in her book that I put in that little YouTube that some of you saw before we started that said, This is from a professor who's written about whistleblowers. It said, a real cynic isn't going to blow the whistle, and a real radical probably won't be in a position to do it. It takes someone who believes in the system far more than the system ever believes in itself. This was Anne. Anne knows I would never go into the U.S. military. Not for a Wall Street banker's wages would I go into the U.S. military. But Anne was there, and she left it. And we have to have good people in the State Department. We're trying to get good people to run for district attorney. And they want to prosecute Bush, but they don't want to prosecute thousands of people for minor drug offenses and nonsensical crimes that they can't support. If we have a system that good people can't get into, we've got a major, major problem. But when the system gets so bad that you're given orders you cannot follow, then you have an absolute duty to leave and to come back when you can work. And this goes for the military too, and this is a big part of Anne's book. You know, nobody is advocating a military coup, that the military seize powers and take over. But there is an obligation under the U.S. Constitution and international law to disobey illegal orders. And that means to resign. That means to resign. So if this military is urged into further illegal wars, every member of it, from top to bottom, has a duty to do what Anne Wright has done. And the stories told in her book, Dissent, Voices of Conscience, Government Insiders Speak Out Against the War in Iraq, are absolutely the most inspiring stories you can take, whether or not you even know anyone who knows anyone who works in the government. These whistleblowers are a model for what the rest of us have to be as well. And there's one woman that I want to credit because of where we are and because of something that's coming up that's not in the book, and some of you may know her, and that's Karen Kwiatkowski, who is a professor up at James Madison University, who worked in the Pentagon in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, who worked with the Office of Special Plans there, which was run by a guy named Doug Feith. Now, as you know, Cheney and gang badgered the CIA and the legal intelligence agencies to lie about the need to invade Iraq, to invent stories about weapons and ties to Al-Qaeda and so forth, but they couldn't get sufficient lies. They set up, illegally, outside of the legal intelligence operations, a separate intelligence office within the Pentagon called the Office of Special Plans, the sole function of which was to produce so-called intelligence that was exactly what Bush and Cheney wanted to hear. This was run by Doug Feith. This was the guy who took the intelligence from a drunken, unreliable man who went by the name of Curveball within the German government, who had told stories to the German government that the German government didn't believe, but that nonetheless Doug Feith was happy to believe, and invented these tales of meetings between Al-Qaeda and the Iraqi government that were used to sell us this war. Well, I mention this in part because on October 27th, Doug Feith will be the honored guest and speaker at the Miller Center on Public Affairs at the University of Virginia in my hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia. These are events that are open to the public. It's an hour long, but you want to get there an hour ahead of time to get a seat near Doug Feith. No cost, no tickets, no searches, no metal detectors, just walk in and have a seat. And it's questions and answers. It's a couple questions from the presenter and questions and answers from the rest of us. And I have some questions for this guy. And I would like to see that room absolutely packed. It holds 50, 75 people. I would like to see it absolutely packed with people who have questions, including why a war criminal would be invited to speak at all at the University of Virginia. October 27th, the Miller Center on Public Affairs at the University of Virginia. Just check the schedule on their website and check the website charlottesvillepeace.org. And without further ado, I want to bring up one of the most unrelenting, intelligent, courageous, informed leaders that any movement for peace or justice has had for the past 3 years, who spoke last night in Charlottesville, went to take part in a congressional hearing and a civil disobedience action in Washington, D.C. this morning, and came back here this evening to Staunton, is off to Norfolk tomorrow, and I'm sure has 3 things to do on the way to Norfolk, who absolutely never stops, and I don't know where we would be if she did. Retired Colonel Ann Wright.